Okay, guys, we got to be honest here. You all know by now that RentRedi is an awesome property management software that Corey and I use to elevate our business on multiple levels between being landlords and managing our tenants. But this isn't just an old podcast ad about how you can manage all your units, maintenance, screening, leases, tenants, and using RentRedi's mobile app. This podcast ad is a secret. That's because this month, RentRedi is releasing a game-changing feature that will save you a whole lot of time and headache when it comes to crunching numbers on your rentals. While we can't share it just yet, make sure you stay tuned to our show, The Weekly Juice, for the surprise reveal. Because we have it on good authority that RentRedi will be letting our listeners know once this top secret feature is ready to go. In the meantime, if you're looking to get started using RentRedi's powerhouse of a platform and get signed up, saving 50% off any RentRedi plan, you'll just have to use the code JUICEPOD. That's JUICEPOD on their website. That's 50% off any RentRedi plan when you sign up using our code JUICEPOD at rentredi.com. Go to rentredi.com and use code JUICEPOD, JUICEPOD, for 50% off any RentRedi plan. If this is your first time here, welcome. During our shows, we interview successful entrepreneurs and investors to spread knowledge, advice, and actionable tactics to help others in the pursuit of financial freedom. We discuss successes, failures, systems, motivations, experiences, and key lessons learned along the way in the hopes that these stories help you along your journey. Tune in every Wednesday to get your weekly juice. If you've been here before and like what you've been hearing, please subscribe, share with friends, rate, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That goes an extremely long way for us. It's simple. Just click on your podcast app, type in our podcast name, The Weekly Juice, click on the reviews, and let us know what you think. The more ratings we get, the more eyes we'll get in our show, and in turn, we'll be able to provide you all with high-quality guests. You can also find us on Instagram at Weekly Juice Pod for daily content and personal finance tips to assist in your journey towards financial freedom. Welcome back to the Weekly Juice, where we talk real estate, personal finance, and entrepreneurship. Ryan and Corey here with another episode for you. Today we had on special guest Bonnie Galam. She is a real estate attorney and investor that has built up a portfolio of over 100 units. She invests in the South Jersey and Philadelphia area. Awesome episode. Went in depth on a lot of different things, from LLCs, real estate trusts, and S Corps, and just kind of talked about the nitty gritty on how people can essentially protect their assets. So
yeah. And she specializes in helping investors. What she says is helping investors grow secure portfolios, and she provides really sound legal advice. And I think one of the good things about having a lawyer on your team who actually is an investor themselves is that she knows, because she's been through it before, and she kind of explains a lot of that during the episode. She's, she's relatively young. She's got young kids, and her husband and her have built this portfolio of student rentals of like over 100 units. So it's pretty exciting. She dove in deep on a lot of topics. So make sure that you're paying attention. Maybe pen and paper might be necessary in this episode, but I think we should bring her in here.
Let's do it. Bonnie, officially welcome to the Weekly Juice podcast. Corey and I are thrilled to have you on. We briefly met at our local real estate meetup a long time ago, but officially excited to have you on the show and dive into your background on real estate law. So Bonnie, if you could just introduce everyone to you and give us a little story on how you got into real estate.
Sure, guys. So my name is Bonnie Galam. As you mentioned, I am a real estate attorney, but before that, I was a real estate investor. The way I kind of will say my progression went was I was in law school and I met my husband, and my husband was a real estate investor. And I did not go to law school with the intention of going into real estate. I always kind of loved it. Like, I was always interested in real estate, but it just, in my mind, it was not what I went to law school for. I wanted to be a litigator. I wanted to be a trial attorney. And ultimately, that's what I graduated and started doing. I started off actually after working for the court system. I worked in what's known as insurance defense. And so those would be the attorneys that your insurance company would hire in the event that you got sued. And so I started off being on the flip side, where I was defending contractors or homeowners or landlords when they would get sued in a way that it would trigger their insurance policy. And so I did that for a little bit. Frankly, I hated my bosses, so I quit. And I went to the prosecutor's office. So I did criminal work for several years. Cut my teeth in the courtroom, loved every single minute of it. But I also started, doing more hands-on work in our real estate portfolio. That was at that point now my husband's full-time job. He was not a CPA. He was an accountant. He never bothered to take the CPA exam, but he was an accountant and eventually just left and did the real estate stuff full-time. And I was like, I really like this area of law. God damn it. Like, why didn't I take more classes on this in law school? And so when we would meet with our attorneys, I would, really kind of take it in and understand the process and like try to figure out what exactly they were doing and why they were making the decisions and advice that they were giving to us. And then started kind of doing more of it on my own in the background. Since I worked for the government, I couldn't officially represent us, but like I could at least comprehend and interpret everything that was going on. And I also started to see that I didn't really love the way that we were working with real estate attorneys. It felt very, I would say unfriendly. Like I hated the hourly bill. We'd buy a property and it'd be like a surprise bill at the closing table, or you just get these surprise bills all the time, anytime you ask them a question. And I was like, well, this is really crappy. Like a huge part of being a real estate investor is protecting yourself, making sure you've got the legal stuff in place. But this whole system, this structure is deterring me from doing that. And I don't want to call my lawyer when I've got, this red flag going on with a contract or a tenant or a property. And so I was like, you know what? I want to eventually, create my own law firm, which I did, but I also want to do it better. I want to work with investors the way I wanted to be worked with as an investor myself. And so I created a flat rate only law firm where when you work with me, I will give you a quote up front. That's what it's going to be, period. There's not going to be a surprise. And so that has been, well received, but it's also kind of given me a little bit of a unique position because I don't just look at real estate through the lens of a lawyer. I also get it as an investor because for every legal answer, there's often a business answer. And I realized that in some ways that was a detriment to me as a lawyer where I'm like, hey, yeah, you could do an eviction, but have you tried cash for keys or have you tried these other things where that may not be best for me, the lawyer, but it's probably the best for the client and it's probably best for the tenant. And so I realized I was kind of giving this type of advice and it was working out much better for investors. And so I created a program called Landlord Law School about 1.5 years ago at the start of the eviction moratorium, which I imagine we'll talk about in more detail in a little bit, to kind of be this resource that was literally a one-stop shop for real estate investors to learn more about asset protection, but also asset protection in a way that I felt that real estate attorneys or asset protection attorneys weren't being truly honest about. Real estate asset protection is often sold as what lawyers can sell. They can sell LLCs, they can sell trusts, but they can't sell things that would actually prevent you from getting sued in the first place. The way LLCs and trusts and things like that work is they help protect you once you get sued. No one doesn't get sued because they have an LLC. That I've never heard of such a thing. Right. And one thing that happens when you go to law school is you come out with a bunch of friends who are also lawyers. And so I've got friends who, sue people for a living. They're plaintiffs, personal injury lawyers. And I've never once heard, well, they've got a Wyoming LLC, so I'm just going to not even waste my time. And so I really thought about, I'm like, well, how can investors do that? How can we nip this stuff in the butt before it becomes a huge legal problem where they have to hire attorneys and trigger their insurance? And a lot of this stuff is stuff that insurance doesn't even cover. We're talking about asset protection. And I know I'm going down a whole rabbit hole here right now. This is not part of my story. But if we're talking about asset protection, it's not just how do I prevent this person who's going to slip and fall on my property? It's how do I save money, period? How am I increasing my bottom line so that way I've got more money to invest, or I'm not just wasting my time with frivolous BS with contractors or tenants or whatever? How can I run this tight ship all around? And so that's kind of where I am now. In terms of our portfolio, it is, like you said, it's about over 100 doors. It's almost all of it is in Philadelphia proper. We've got some in South Jersey as well, a little bit of commercial there. And it's, I'd say largely student rentals. It's not specifically student rentals. Any of those apartments can go to anyone, but just due to the nature of their location near a few of the universities, that's largely what we get. And so it's high turnover. We just passed September 1st, now that we're recording this on the 2nd, I think it's the 2nd. And so this weekend was our biggest turnover weekend of the year. And we self-manage. It's my husband's full-time job, at least during the summer, during the, the off season, because we've got a very condensed turnover season. During the off season, it's more, paying the bills, making sure there's, no maintenance issues that crop up, and being on call 24/7.
Wow. Yeah. That's a lot. It's a lot of work, and kudos to your husband there. Managing 100 plus units is no easy feat. Can you break it down? We hear 100 units, 1,000 units, 50 units, whatever the number is, but yours is specifically 100. I'm curious of how many properties that actually is.
It's I'd say about 25 or so.
Okay, cool.
It's almost all multifamily. And so most of our properties, I'd say, are 4 to 6 units per building.
Awesome. And can you break it down for us? And we have a lot of investors that are, maybe between their first, fifth, 10th unit count, essentially, or a property count. How do you scale, or how do you recommend someone scales from a small portfolio like this to jump up to potentially 100 unit portfolio?
So we did what we now know is called the BRRRR method. I think back when my husband started, it was kind of use expensive money fast and then refi it into cheap money later, which I now understand why they came up with something catchy called BRRRR. But it was, when you think about Philadelphia, because I think where we invested was somewhat of a unique situation. Think about investing in Philadelphia 10, 15 years ago. You could get good stuff at tax sales. You could get good things at auction. It's a lot more competitive right now because Philadelphia in some ways has come on the map. And so you've got foreign investors, you've got New York investors coming into the city, but we've also really benefited from a huge amount of appreciation during that time. And so when we're buying these properties that are, commercial loans with 5-year balloons, every time we did that, we had a huge bump up in appreciation. So we could pull a lot more out and use that to acquire more. And so I will admit there were many years where we were just extraordinarily cash poor. I mean, we were acquiring building after building after building, but literally that's all we were kind of doing. And so I'd say it was a mix of being able to buy cheap properties at auction. That's largely where we were able to do that. And then burring it through a high appreciation decade or so. This is not something that we did over 18 months. When I hear people who are, acquiring dozens of properties, especially the last 2 years, I'm like, wow, I'm so impressed by you guys, because I feel like it's so much harder now than it was, 10, 15 years ago. And, you hear about I'll call them the old heads who, started this stuff in the 80s, but it's just a totally different environment right now. And it changes every year. It's never it's too late. That's not the impression I want to give out. But I do feel like it was a bit easier for us to do it back then. So Philadelphia didn't, was kind of ugh, Philadelphia.
Yeah, I agree. It has come up for sure. And I just think I look at it now, even Temple University, back in the day, even 10 years ago, it was decent. It was coming up. They started building new things. But if you drive by there now, it's a completely different
You don't even recognize
campus.
it. Yeah. I mean, I went to Drexel on the other side of Philly. And so when I go through there now, I was when I was in school, we got a tiny little Starbucks outpost. And I was woo, we made it, guys. We got to start. There's 7 Starbucks on this campus.
It's insane.
It's insane the change that this city has gone through in such a short period of time.
Can you talk about we talk about the BRRRR method a lot, but I don't think, and maybe it's the same, but for you doing it on small multis and apartments, what's the difference between that and a single family? What I guess, how much more goes into it? I'm thinking of all these units and, figuring out how to rehab them and all that stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing I think we've done a little bit different was that we didn't do a huge rehab. I mean, our markets, and largely because of how Philadelphia was at the time, by no means do I want to say we're slumlords, but we put in, the cheapest cabinets, the cheapest granite. If it had original hardwoods in there, that was staying in there. We weren't putting LVP down. I don't even know if the LVP existed back then. But we were, getting these places ship-shape, tenant-ready. They were near universities. They're going to beat the living crap out of by, students. And so they needed to be safe. They needed to be clean. They didn't necessarily have to be pretty or trendy. And so we didn't put out an extraordinary amount of CapEx up front. We kind of took the approach of let's do it as we need it. And we've kind of done a little bit every year. I mean, different properties were like, hey, let's redo the exterior and replace all the windows now. And I feel like a lot of people, when they do BRRRR, they kind of taken it as like a free for all, like let's do everything all at once. And we've kind of taken the approach of let's do what we need to do to maximize cash flow, and we'll tackle it down the line as we need to. And then the only thing I would say is that lenders are just a little bit finickier. If you've ever taken out a commercial loan versus a loan for like a single property or a duplex, or if you're house hacking, something like that, the process is a lot different. In some ways it can be easier if you've got good cash flow, if you've got tenants in there and you can show that, how the property is performing, but it's not like a 45-day refi either. And so, I mean, we've got properties that we've been trying to refi for the better part of the year right now. And so it's a different animal, but it's not. If you know how to do it on a single, you can do it larger scale, especially if you've got the right people on your team, the right lenders who will kind of hold your hand through the process.
When you go to the bank, and you said there's a difference between commercial lending and residential lending, do you have like a packet you put together? I know it says like you basically said you have to prove that, you have cash flow coming in and that you're seeing success. We've had other people mention the same thing. And I'm wondering if there's something that you bring into the bank or you send to the lender just to prove this is true.
Yeah. I mean, bank statements, tax returns. I mean, it's not too different than what you would use to provide for I'll say a residential lender, but there, also copies of leases. You may want to show that because they're going to cross check to see like, hey, you're saying these are the leases. Now let's see the deposits that correspond with that, especially in the last year where just because you have a lease doesn't mean you've got a paying tenant. And so they're going to want to kind of cross-reference that, because if they're going to count that income whether it's for a purchase money mortgage or a refinance mortgage, they're going to want to make sure that those figures are actually there, in the same way that when you go through personal underwriting, they're going to want to make sure that that job you said you had is actually, depositing money into your bank account every 2 weeks. And so it's very much the same. So to answer you, yes, we somewhat have like a packet, but it's more just like, here's where the bank statements are, here's where the leases are, here's
perfect.
Where's
it's
that
not
is.
It's not like a snapshot. All good.
It's not like a whole snapshot. I don't have like I'll say like a business planning type of document that we turn over to the lenders.
It's interesting what happens in like when you have this appreciation period, let's say 2014 to 2021, where you essentially get to become your own bank. And I think that's a really part of it's luck, right? You can't always account for these things, but to be able to pull money out of the properties that were once worth $275,000 and they're now worth $475,000, it just puts you in a better position. So I think that's really interesting. I don't think it's a strategy that people can necessarily bank on, but if you hold properties long enough, it seems like that this is almost an inevitable thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like when people use a HELOC on their personal residence to do it. We're just doing the same thing on the refi with our loans. And I mean, some people will take the opposite approach. They're like, I want to pay down these loans as much as possible. I want there to be, free and clear in 15, 20, 30 years. That's not really the approach we've made. We've kind of always been focused on cash flow. And so, especially since we've been in a decreasing interest rate environment, in many ways, we can pull out, tens of thousands of dollars and basically maintain what the payment is, of course, the cost of the loan. And so that's given us a lot of flexibility to leverage the existing properties we have. And when you're looking at, these refis on your personal, on these properties, and you're like, well, the interest rate is, we'll say on average, it was like 4.5% or 5%. Do we think we can make cash on cash return better than that if we pull cash out? And we've been able to do that. And so I wish I could say that was intentional. I think in large part, like I went to school at Drexel, my husband went to school at Temple. And so we invested around us. And that was just, it happened to be, I think, a hot city. And we didn't intentionally do that. I wish I had like that magic 8-ball to like shake and be like, this is where we're going to go next, because we just got this Midas touch of mass appreciation. It was just kind of, this is where we both were. And that's where it ended up.
Yeah. I want to compare this to like, when I was at Temple, and I just like, this is a student housing thing that Ryan and I have not gotten into, but we've talked about it with other people on our podcast and thought about it as maybe a future thing. Part of me seems like it's more maintenance and part of me seems like it's less maintenance. And I'm curious what your take on it is, but I was just doing some math and I lived in a property I lived in a property that was, I guess, considered a duplex, but there was 5 rooms in the upstairs and 5 rooms in the downstairs. So, and everybody was paying $700 a month. And I'm just, it's insanity. So I'm doing some math, and you're talking about, you're essentially the property could not be worth more than $350,000.
I was gonna say the guy probably bought it for $45,000 at auction or
maybe,
something.
but like it was, yeah, right. And then he fixed it up. It was fixed up. It was decent. It looked nice. But like if you do 700 times 10, you're talking about $7,000. And his monthly operating expenses could not have been more than, I'm doing like top of the line, like highest could be $2,500, $3,000. And that's at least $3,000 a month in cash flow right there off the bat. So it's like, is that realistic? And are you seeing, I don't know if you have properties that are like that much of a span of, you have all different rooms rented out by all different people and 10 of them, but like, do you find, is that why you went after that type of asset class?
So we went after that type of asset class, I think, one, because we knew the areas really well. We knew like what was a good block, where was a developing block, where was, for example, even like campus security covering, when you live in an area and you know it that intimate, you're like, hey, this is worth it, or it's going to be worth it down the line. One thing I will say is we don't do any rent by the rooms. We have personally found it to be a lot harder to rent anything above like a 3-bedroom. And so we would rather convert, a 4-bedroom into like 2 or 3 studios than have a big 5-bedroom unit. We find that those larger units cause more headache. They have more vacancy. They're a lot harder to rent. And largely because I don't like doing rent by the room. It usually just ends up in, this person stole my macaroni and cheese and this person doesn't take the trash out. And so we'd rather just have a smaller group of people who normally like each other. That being said, every year we have someone who's like, they're not my friend anymore. I want them off the lease. And you're like, well, you have to go through the whole application process and we'll work with you. Like we are very sublet friendly. And I think some of it is realizing which are the issues to really kind of press on as a landlord and what are the things that are like not a big deal, just let them go. And we have found that like subletting is one of those things where it's in the tenant's favor, it's in our favor. Like don't give them a hard time if they're like, hey, something needs to change, we need a sublet.
Got it. Very, very cool. I'm curious. So you chose the Philadelphia market because of proximity to where you lived, or was it something that, I don't know if you went to law school around here, or was it intentional and kind of this thought that this place was going to see some improvement over the next?
I think some of it was definitely a mix. I mean, some of it was just like, here it is, like we can physically go to these auctions. We know the areas. We had some friends who were investing in Philly. They're like, this is some good stuff. You should, I guess they were our drug dealers and said, take the first hit and we'll have you hooked. And we also we love this city, and we believed very strongly that like what we saw as like a turnaround was like truly like something that was going to stick around for the long term. I mean, I remember when like the only restaurants you could go to was like a Steven Star Continental. And like, that was it. Like that was the fancy restaurant and there was nothing else because Center City was, it cleared out at 5 p.m. and no one stuck around. And now, the market is still on fire. And we're probably talking at this point over, I went to Drexel starting in we're probably talking about at least 20 years worth of, really heavy, improvements and appreciation in the city. And we kind of came in maybe midway through that.
Got it. Very cool.
Love it. I want to transition a little bit over to you being a real estate attorney. I think a lot of people would like to hear from you specifically. I think we like to dive in on specific niches. And being that you are an attorney, I have a few questions for you. So the first one's pretty basic, but when you go out and build your team, right, it's kind of daunting for some people. There's so many different people that you feel like you need to have in your team, but why do you feel it's important that everyone has a real estate attorney on their team if they're looking to invest?
I think one of the most important parts of having a real estate attorney on your team is having someone, one is having the relationship and having someone kind of know where you're going from a legal standpoint. Because if you come in and you call when there's like a crisis, there's so much back work that has to happen from a legal standpoint for us to be like, okay, where's this going? But also then what is your goal? Like, how can we make this better? Because for some people that could be, a partnership dissolution, or it could be, I want to buy someone out, or I want to remove this tenant. And so for us to do that back work, it can be a lot of, I'll say a lot of extra expense. It's also, I have found that a lot of investors just don't know what they don't know. And you really kind of have to have someone who has, I'll say, like the heart of an educator, because that was one of the things that I really struggled with the attorneys we used to work with, was it was kind of just like, let me just come in and like stamp it out. And you kind of have no idea what just happened, and therefore have no idea how to like stop that from happening again in the future. And so if you can find someone who will be like, hey, this is where things went wrong. This is what we're going to try to do to like get you back on the right path. And then this is what you should be doing in the future. That's great. I don't work in, I'll say, an attorney state, meaning there's not an attorney required to close on transactions in New Jersey or Pennsylvania where I'm licensed, but I also do a lot of work there. A lot of people don't know the right questions to ask, the due diligence you should be getting in order to, properly and, confidently, let's say, like truly understand how you're purchasing a property. I have even just things like, do you even know how to read a title report? Or do you just get a commitment and you're like, check, moving on. And so a lot of that stuff can be, maybe you don't do it every time. Maybe you do it when you're in the beginning stages and you're like, hey, this is what my attorney is doing. And so now I know what I should be doing in the future. Or maybe it's something that you want to do all the time. I mean, there's plenty of attorneys, and I do this myself where I've, got some flipper clients who they'll just use me on every transaction. It just makes their lives easier. And I think that's a benefit that a lot of people don't think of, is that in many cases, we're not as expensive as you may think. And so if we can just take something off your plate and make it easier when you're, spinning your wheels or doing something, like, you don't have to be the lawyer. Like, that's a really nice thing, is that you don't have to be the lawyer. You don't have to be the expert in finance. You don't have to be the expert in all that stuff. That's the purpose of building out the team, is that way you don't have to be going down the Google rabbit hole of figuring this stuff out on your own. If you've got a legal question, have a real estate attorney there to answer it for you. That is the simplest answer.
Cool. We have had so many questions. I mean, we're at a 7-unit count, and we've had so many questions in and out going through these deals. And I couldn't agree more. We do have a real estate attorney on our team, and it's been more recent since we've acquired him, if that's the right word. I hired him. But sorry, that's weird. Acquiring properties in my head. But it's been amazing, right? And he's turned into a friend. And just like these little in and out questions that you have on the daily basis, like it's good to go to someone who actually knows what they're doing. So there's 3 things that typically come up in my experience, or questions that in early, I would say newer investors have. They want to know about LLCs, S corps, and trusts. And I know you probably can you explain what each one of these is? And then we'll have questions built off these, probably, specifically LLCs.
Sure. So from 10,000 foot view, an LLC is a business entity. It is a separate legal entity from yourself as an individual. On the other hand, an S corp is a tax election that is just telling the IRS how you want to be taxed as. And so you can be an LLC taxed as a sole proprietorship, which is just a pass-through entity if there's one member in it. You could be an LLC taxed as a partnership, which would be if there's 2 or more people in it. And that, again, is a pass-through entity. Or you can make what's known as an S corp election. And that will have you taxed more like a corporation. And so it's always something I recommend my clients talk to their CPAs about the right time. Usually there's a profit threshold that it will make sense to do that. And it's not for all investing strategies. Some investing strategies, you lose some benefits by creating an S corp. And so it's really important that you don't just be like, hey, I'm going to check that box because I heard it's something special in some way. And so when people say, should I have an LLC or an S corp? I'm like, it's not an either or. It could be a yes and. You could have an LLC and it's taxed as an S corp. And so that is probably that's like nails on the chalkboard when I hear that question improperly answered. And it's, one of those things that's like always in like the forums and the Facebook groups where someone's like, should I have this or that? I'm like, you can have both. And you need to understand which role each has. There's no asset protection, for example, that comes through an S corp because it's just a tax election. It's just saying to the IRS how you want to be taxed. Whereas the LLC, that because it is a separate entity, and the LL stands for limited liability company, not corporation. That's an important distinction. Limited liability company. It does provide a layer of asset protection to it. Now, on the other hand, a trust is not a business entity. It is a legal construct, if you will. And the way I like to describe a trust is that it's like a box. It's just a blank box. And you can put things in that box. And when you put the things in the box, it's owned by the trust and not by you. And so this structure can own things not in your name. And some trusts can provide a layer of perhaps anonymity in certain states. Some states, Florida is notorious for that, actually do provide asset protection through what they call land trusts because they provide for it by statute. Not every state provides for a land trust by statute. But Florida is, I'd say, the big notorious one that does. And so there's all sorts of things you can do for trust. Trusts are also part of an estate planning process where you might have a last will and testament and your power of attorney. And you may also include trusts so that when you pass away, your properties are held in trust for your kids or your grandkids or for philanthropic reasons. You can also use trusts to, if you're for a lot of extraordinarily wealthy people, will do that to get things out of their name for Medicaid planning or to just move things in a way that is more gift tax friendly, because you've got that, it's like $15,700 a year you can gift to someone. But what if you want to gift more than that? What if you got millions and millions and millions of dollars you got to get rid of? And so trusts can be used to start kind of funneling money in ways that will allow you to minimize your tax implications. But we're talking about millions and millions of dollars. It usually can be worth those trusts can be, tens of thousands of dollars to create.
Got it. So thank you for sharing that, Bonnie. And I think that maybe we want to get a little bit more specific here, and I can kind of share about Ryan and I's scenario. So and just maybe many people's scenarios. So we were always under the impression that it's difficult to buy properties in an LLC if you don't already have a bunch of cash flow and or business, I guess just like showing that you've purchased properties in the past. So Ryan and I have actually purchased properties in our own name, and we're running. You're looking at my brother on the other side of here. So it's like somebody that not actually, but I look at him like that.
Like, really?
So somebody that I really, really trust. So I would never recommend to do it with just anybody, but I'm saying we felt that we were comfortable enough to buy properties in our own name, develop or create an LLC, and then run all of our cash flow through that until we have enough, expenses and cash flow coming through so that we look like we're bankable through the LLC. I'm curious if should people purchase properties in their own name? Should they purchase through an LLC? What is your recommendation? Should it be a trust? And is that a myth that you can't buy them through an LLC just right off the bat?
Oh, hands down, that's a myth. I do it all the time. So we'll get that one out there right away. The way you do that is being personal guarantor. And to this day, we're personal guarantor on almost all of our loans. And so, yeah, we still got to have good credit and things like that, but they're not looking at our income necessarily, like our DTI for these loans, but we are still personally guaranteeing them. And so that is how you do that in an LLC. Should you purchase them in an LLC from the get-go? I always recommend it. It's usually from a legal perspective, the cheaper way to do that. Yes, that means you're going to have to do an LLC friendly type loan. So you might be having to do, higher interest rates, 25 to 30% down. And so if that's not in the cards for you, then fine. You don't have to purchase in an LLC, but if you can do that, if that is within, financial reach for you to do that, you can and Philly is the perfect example of this, is because if you ever wanted to move these properties into an LLC, that's what you're getting hit with, transfer tax. And so it can be thousands of dollars down the line to then move it in. Whereas if you just acquired it in the first place, then you've got the transfer tax from when you purchased, but that's it. You're just done. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing is by yes, you can run money through an LLC, but you are not getting the asset protection benefit at all on that property then. There's nothing kind of sheltering the activities on that property from risk. And so if you're doing it just for, credit worthiness, I will say I've never, kind of acquired a property without being personal guarantor on it anyway. And so I don't want that to hold you or anybody back from thinking that they can't start with an LLC. A lot of people use, even hard money. Some hard money lenders even require that you operate as an LLC. And so if you got the hard money up front, if, the numbers are there, right, that you can do an automatic BRRRR, then, best case scenario, you have already got, a cash flowing tenant occupied property that a bank should like to look at anyway.
A couple of things here. We have a lot on LLCs. So I guess the first one I'll touch on is, so say we have a couple of properties in our own names, right? So 50-50 partners. To drop these properties into or transfer these into an LLC now, there's the transfer tax. Can you talk about what percentage that might be? I think it's around 10%, maybe.
Yeah, more. Philly's really bad. It's pushing 10%.
It's 10%. Okay. What about Jersey? Do you know?
Jersey is more friendly. So the thing that you have to keep in mind with Jersey, for example, and I know this is state specific. I don't know how, local your listeners are, but New Jersey, you could do, for example, dollar deed into your LLC so long as the ownership's the same as it is now. And so, for example, I've got a client right now who wants to do just that. She bought a property cash in their own name. They wanted to rehab it. They now want to move it into an LLC. And so it's her and her husband on title. And so her and her husband are also going to then have to be members of that LLC. And so as long as that stays the same, it'll be kind of considered a non-arm's length transaction and then not subject to the transfer tax. Whereas Pennsylvania doesn't really care. Pennsylvania don't care. They're going to tax you on it.
Got it. And so also we've heard about the due on sales clause. So essentially your lender could call your loan due. Yeah. I'm not sure the percentage of times that has happened. Have you seen that in your career yet?
So I've seen it on refi. I've seen it where people will, purchase a property, then go to kind of refi it and they'll be like, hey, what's going on here? It now looks like on title that it's part of an LLC, but you're refining it still in your own name. Like there's a disconnect there. Otherwise, I think it's a little bit of the boogeyman. I don't, think banks largely, so long as you're paying your loan, are looking for this stuff. But the thing that I've talked with some investors about, not just clients, is that we've been in a depreciating interest rate market for well over a decade at this point. And so it's kind of been in the bank's incentive to keep you guys, locked in to what could be a higher interest rate than if they forced you to refi at what may be a lower interest rate. If that goes back up, we're, passing 4 or 5% interest, kind of where commercial loans were just a few years ago, 3 years ago, then maybe they will. I don't know. It could be, I say whatever makes the bank's money is what they're going to do. And so if they haven't done it, it's because it's not in their own interest. It's not because they're worried about you or anything like that.
Cool. Got it. So the properties that we have now, right? Say we don't want a chance to do on sale clause, and then moving forward, if we don't, or if an investor does not want to pay potentially a higher interest rate and deal with the ins and outs of it just being more expensive up front, right?
Oh yeah. There's no doubt that these commercial loans are less favorable than the terms you're going to get on a loan on your personal name.
Would you recommend, can we talk about the trusts again? Because I actually have a few friends that I'm just wet behind the ears on this. I haven't done it myself, but Corey and I, let's just say we have hypothetically 2 properties together right now under our own names. And we want the anonymity and whatever that word is.
Anonymity.
Classic. Say we want that and just essentially to be not able to be found. And I know you said there's a little bit of protection, but not that much. Can you talk about that again? And would you recommend us dropping our properties into a trust or not?
So I think by and large, trusts are something that attorneys have been really good at selling, but there's not as much benefit as it makes it seem. Can you maybe get an incremental level of asset protection through it? Yeah, maybe. But the thing that I feel like is often left out of the discussion of what attorneys are often selling trusts for, which is the anonymity, not knowing who owns what, is the fact that there's something called chain of title. And so it is public record. And so when you move something into a trust and there's going to be a deed that says it is from you two, Ryan and Corey, into this trust that is ABC. And so that is like a little bit like lawyers are not stupid. Like it's not like we've never heard of what, land trusts are. And so I would say, suspect number one is that Corey and Ryan are the ones behind this trust. Now, sometimes the thought is I also think that lawyers are kind of selling the stupidity of other lawyers, which is not something I would ever want to bank on, is that they're like, okay, well, you can have these these trusts and, have a different trust for every property. That way, if someone was to like search property records, they wouldn't be able to figure out, oh, this person's got tens of, properties. And then they'll just walk away. If someone's actually injured, they're going to sue you no matter what. And so that does not stop anything. And having something in a trust doesn't mean someone can't find you either. The one thing I have heard of people doing, though, is that they will sometimes put properties into a trust where, it's one of these revocable trusts or a land trust, and they will make the beneficiary of that trust their LLC. And so, again, the asset itself is not really protected because it is not being held in that LLC. Perhaps some of the income is then protected because it's in the LLC, and perhaps some of the activities of the members could be somewhat protected because that's perhaps within the actions of the LLC. But I by and large, I do think that the trusts are kind of oversold for what they can actually do.
Yeah, like what is the benefit of a trust? I don't even see really much of it besides,
Well, it's really good for lawyers. They because they get to sell you the trust and then the LLC.
Right.
And then maybe the deed to transfer everything around, and then they'll probably be your trustee, which they can charge you a maintenance for every year. And so it is definitely something where, in terms of asset protection, I see that as like the cherry sprinkles on top of the whole sundae of asset protection, rather than like the solid core foundation of what you can do to be protecting yourself. And so I'll give you an example of a distinction is the fact that in Florida, for example, where they have these statutory land trusts, they say assets held in these land trusts have asset protection. If you were to create that trust in New Jersey, you wouldn't really have one. Now, the other thing to kind of keep in mind is like you're talking about activities across state lines and how is New Jersey or Pennsylvania going to treat a Florida domiciled trust. But the thought is, and largely what the goal is of these trusts, is to just hide who is behind them. And my thought is like, unless you are, Donald Trump or Madonna or something like that, where like your name is a target, chances are your assets aren't a target. And another example I like to give is I'm like, well, let's just look at this from a general business perspective. Landlords and real estate investors are not the only people on the planet who get sued. And so we're not the only people on the planet who have asset protection concerns. So let's look at what your doctor's doing. Let's look at what, Amazon's doing or Comcast is doing. What are they doing? They're not holding their stuff in land trusts. We're not trying to hide from this stuff. What really they're doing is they've got, a business entity. They've got really good insurance. They've got really good contracts. And if they get sued, then they're prepared to defend it. And that's really more so the approach that I think investors should take to asset protection, is more so having this holistic approach of, yeah, we've got stuff to cover us if things go wrong. Yeah, we're putting things in place to try to prevent them from happening in the first place. And if they do, I want to know about it. I don't want it to be, something that is hidden from me, because that'll maybe stall things like 30 days. That doesn't make them go away. You can be sued in absentia. Okay. And so you want to know about stuff that goes wrong. I've been sued a handful of times in relation to our properties, and I've also defended people as an insurance defense attorney through these types of things. And fundamentally, that's what it is. I've never met a PI attorney, a personal injury attorney, who's been like, man, these land trusts are stumping us. Like we can't get anything for our clients. And so that's where I think there's a little bit of a disconnect. Will it slow things down? Maybe. Could it maybe, get you less targeted by like spammy type of things? Maybe.
Would you get? Not to jump in front of you real quick, but what'd you get sued for? I think that's very interesting to talk about, because we're talking about asset protection and just like, what are things that potentially investors should be weary of that they potentially could get sued for, and why these LLCs and these, protecting their assets actually make sense.
Sure. We'll give you two examples. Two examples of when we've been sued. The first example was a time where a handyman who we worked on our properties for many years. He was kind of like our go-to guy to call for like little odd jobs around the properties. And eventually that relationship kind of faded away. And it was like kind of like how contractor relationships fade away. Like we didn't think anything of it. And there was no, bad blood or anything. And then a few years later, we got slapped by a lawsuit from this guy saying he fell and hurt himself in one of our properties. And worst of all, he said he was our employee. And so he was entitled to like workers' comp and things like that. And we were like, what? Like, first off, we knew like that incident never happened. And we also knew that he was not our employee, but we also kind of saw, and this was a big lesson for us kind of early on, that we're like, we don't have anything to really prove that. Like, since this was a relationship that kind of just was ongoing and open and was often like picking up the phone, hey, can you go to this property and, paint it? Or, hey, can you go to this property and change the air filter? Whatever the little odd jobs were, it wasn't something where we, had a scope of work and a signed invoice and this and that. It was just kind of a free for all. And that left an opening for us to get sued. And so that was a big lesson for us in terms of how we work with contractors and how we document that type of work.
How do you document that now? Not to go super into a rabbit hole here, because I know Corey has one for you, but say we do have a guy or a gal that comes over and just does things on the fly. Because we actually do.
I would make sure up front that you do have a good written contract about what the relationship is and is not. And so if they are not your employees, say you are not our employee unless there is a signed writing saying otherwise. And so that kind of helps kind of keep it, if it is open-ended otherwise, and put in there, the terms of, invoicing when things will be late, because that kind of stuff can stand the test of time. And so this is just the nature of how our relationship is going to be. If you want us to pay you, then your job is to send us a formal invoice. It can be on Word, it can be on QuickBooks. It doesn't need to be like, the Mona Lisa, but that way we never have a situation where it's he said, she said. Also, and we're not perfect at this, we try to never pay with cash anymore. A lot of people, and especially in the inner cities, will be just like, hey, like I'll do this for you for like 500 cash or whatever, because frankly, a lot of these contractors don't want to be paying taxes on it. They're not reporting all their income or whatever the case may be is. But that's also really risky for us, the investor, if they were to come back and be like, hey, you never paid us for it. And you're like, right, I freaking can't prove that now. And so getting really clean on the way we pay people through checks and documenting that on our end, like putting in the memo actually what it was for, and not just playing kind of loosey-goosey with how we pay people. So that's kind of how we've improved our practices there. Did you want me to tell you the second lawsuit?
Sure.
Sure. Okay. So the second lawsuit was a situation where we actually were helping a friend out. We have other investor friends, and when you have investor friends, sometimes you do favors for each other. And what we had done for this guy was we put his property onto Craigslist for him. And we offered, because my husband's an agent, to just kind of show it. We were, opening the doors. We were not like the leasing agent. He still handled the leases, but since my husband was an agent, we were cool, just kind of like opening the door. And so his number was the number that was on like the Craigslist and, apartments.com ad. And apparently someone slipped and fell in front of this building, and they're like, you're the property manager, your fault. You should have been shoveling the snow. We're like, whoa. We weren't the property manager. We were
shoveling the snow. Wow.
Yeah. That's going to bite every landlord in the butt in Philadelphia at some point. But it didn't even happen on one of our own properties. It happened in front of a friend's property. And, our friend was very, gracious and, honest about what happened, and had affidavits and saying, no, this was, the relationship, how it was. And, they had no obligation to do that, to try to just keep it under his own liability insurance. And ultimately that's what happened. But we've since, created our own now separate management LLC, and that has its own insurance policies and things like that. So that way, even though we only do this for friends, we now kind of have separated that out. And we also kind of felt it was, as things grew, that it was kind of smart for us to isolate our management activities into its own LLC, as opposed to kind of having it intermingled among the asset holding LLCs.
Got it. That's it's just amazing the things you can get sued for. I think about it all the time at my property. I was like, one of my tenants has like these like little padded carpet things on the steps, and I like almost fell, and I was like, I just thought in my head, like, should I be saying like, hey, you can't have this there, but she put it there? I'm just like, you know what? I'm not going to like worry about every little thing because I'm sure there's like always something. But for me, it's I just try to build relationships and hopefully that I don't get sued there. But
the funny thing is both of our lawsuits came out of what we thought were good relationships.
Yeah.
And
it's tough. It's tough. I mean, that's why you protect yourself, right? So
yeah, exactly.
So I think we want to move and talk a little bit about the eviction moratorium and how it's kind of made it's on a like kind of separated the playing field a little bit and made it hard for investors to feel confident investing, one, but two, just not knowing if they can actually have recourse for tenants not paying. So I'm curious, I'll have a scenario of my own, but I'm curious like what your best piece of advice is for landlords that have tenants that aren't paying at this time. I mean, what are the things that you would be telling your clients?
So right now, and I think this is a big misunderstanding, and granted, the playing field for this can change, and it may, but as of right now, the way the eviction moratorium has worked is that it's about possession. It's who has access to this property, who can control it. It's not about whether rent is due. And so in theory, past rent can be sued for in small claims court or regular court. I know for a lot of landlords where we're now talking about 18 months deep into this, It may be, beyond small claims court at this point. And so that is something worth, considering. And it's also something that I've seen, negotiated on the buyer's end where it's like, hey, I'm willing to take this on at the price you want, but I now want to have the right to be able to, sue to get the back rent to kind of collect that, or vice versa, where I've had it where the seller's saying like, look, I'll sell it to you for this price, but I need the ability to sue them for the period of my ownership. But it has definitely put a squeeze, I think, on the market. I think it's definitely hurt the small landlord more than anybody else. And it's kind of given an opportunity for a lot of institutional investors who have much lower thresholds of like what return they're okay with to kind of swoop in. And Philly's another great example of that kind of happening, where you've got a lot of big investors just kind of chomping up properties for like numbers that just don't make sense. Like for like the everyday investor, you're like, I don't know, they want to have it for that price, have at it.
Right.
But they're kind of like stupid numbers. It's like, is this even cash flowing? And in many ways that's kind of been an ongoing problem with American real estate for many years, is that American real estate has been seen as a safe place to park foreign money. It's a hedge against inflation. It's got good appreciation value. And so people don't mind just like, I'll just own this thing and I don't care if it ever pays me a cent, as long as the cash that I use to buy it doesn't lose value. Right. And so, all of that kind of put together has made for a really tough environment for landlords for the last 18 months.
Got it. Yeah. So I mean, one of the questions that we've been asked, and I always wanted to ask a lawyer about this, is that I guess, so I'm wondering if you have a tenant that you're looking to not renew their lease on right now, and their lease comes up, let's just say it's the end of September. Is there any recourse or laws against not renewing tenants? I think people are afraid of them just staying anyway. And then what you do, especially with the eviction moratorium, is there anything that's in any of these moratoriums? And you may not know the answer to this, I'm just throwing it out there, that is stating that you can't not renew, because typically you can just not renew because maybe the relationship isn't there. They've paid late too many times. There's a lot of reasons why a landlord could not renew and it'd be okay. Is that different in today's climate? So one, I definitely agree that there's this kind of added risk and fear of just off the bat telling a tenant that you're not renewing them, and then they just turn into non-paying and not leaving. Especially because the same way that there's a housing shortage in terms of home sales, there's a rental shortage. There's just not a lot of places for people to move to, even if they wanted to. I've seen that come up a lot in the last year, where people are like, yeah, I don't mind leaving, but like I need to find somewhere I can stay. And there's just so few rentals on the market, and I think there's even fewer rentals because a lot of people were selling them off, especially single family rentals over the last year, and they're going back onto the market as owner occupants. That being said, I think it's important to note, just because I'm licensed in New Jersey, and if some of your listeners are in New Jersey is actually unique, where you can't just not
not renew a tenant's lease. You have to renew their lease. It's considered a tenancy for life, unless there's a basis for eviction. And so in New Jersey, unless there is, and served upon them really a basis to evict. And that could be something as little as a rent increase that they just refuse to pay. They have the right to stay in that property. You can't just be like, hey guys, not renewing. Here's your 30 days notice or 60 days notice, whatever your lease says. Thank you. Please leave.
Even if you have a situation like you want to do renovations to the property and nobody can live there, you cannot make that decision.
So that only applies on so New Jersey kind of has two layers of eviction laws. One where there's a few different kind of moving parts to it, but owner occupant properties, which I'll say like house hacked properties where you live there, kind of have one set of rules. And there's another set of rules if it's properties under 4 units, and then 4 units and above. So quads and above have a different set of rules. And so generally speaking, no. There are some, bases if say you wanted to move a family member in, or you wanted to go and move into this unit. In theory, yes. But again, right now, and this is kind of slowly kind of lifting, is I know in New Jersey and until very, very recently, you couldn't evict for basically anything. It didn't matter. The people could be, dealing drugs out of your house. You're probably not going to get them evicted in New Jersey. But now that the moratoriums are slowly fizzling out, I will say they're still there, but they're weaker in some senses. You may be able to. Will that happen in as quickly as if they just left on their own? Absolutely not. We're still probably talking about months at this point to get anybody out. And so that's kind of where, maybe we should be looking at things like cash for keys or, other alternatives to kind of just give a little extra carrot to get them out the door, because otherwise the vacancy or getting stuck with someone who's not paying is just a lot more expensive.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. Are you saying this during the eviction period that you can't not renew, or in general in New Jersey, that is like a law without
in New Jersey, that is the law. Tenants cannot be removed unless there is a basis for eviction present. So you can't not renew them unless there's 16 enumerated reasons why you can evict someone, but that will be in place. And so what you would do in New Jersey, for example, is you'd say the basis is they don't want to pay the rent increase. You increase the rent $25 a month. They don't want to pay it anymore. And so they could have done it and they could have stayed. It was, no hard feelings type of situation, but they chose not to. And so you may have to provide them with the notice of that and then say, great, you refuse to do this. Here's your notice to quit. You've got, 60 days notice, please leave. If they don't, then you can file the eviction complaint. And so it's a very kind of long, multi-step process to get them out. But yeah, generally speaking, unless one of those 16 reasons is present, you can't get them out. You can't just not renew their lease.
That was cool. Yeah, that's very interesting. I was
Never
wondering
heard that.
A specific scenario that was perfect. It is a couple extra steps, but that's one thing I thought right away. I was like, you could just raise the rent, right? And if they can't afford it, it kind of goes down.
Some of the things I've told, landlords to do is, if you want to increase the rent, or you can change a lease term. And so I said, you can say it's no longer a smoking friendly property or no longer a pet friendly property, whatever the case may be, so long as it's not like a service animal. You can't discriminate against them on that basis. But just generally speaking, because I had a tenant where they bought a property, it had tenants in it, and the tenants had 5 cats and 3 dogs and chickens. And they're just this is insanity. I can't rent the upstairs unit now because the downstairs is a literal zoo. And so we were thinking of ways that, we can get them out. There was 3 boats in their driveway. It was like a hoarder across the board situation, hoarding in pets, hoarding in vehicles. And so there's a lot of ways you can get creative with it. And an eviction attorney or a real estate attorney can be kind of a great kind of sounding board for you to kind of figure out how to get them out.
Perfect. Can you talk about, I know you teased it a little bit, cash for keys. We've talked about it briefly before, but what is cash for keys and why is that a good alternative rather than having to go through the eviction process?
Gosh, I love cash for keys. I should have it tattooed to my forehead. It is what we have used in great success in our business. I've seen it work really well with investors, especially over the course of, the moratorium. It hasn't worked 100% of the time, but it at least puts things on the table. And so what cash for keys is whether it's a non-paying tenant or sometimes, you buy a property that's a foreclosure and the homeowner's still in there, or you've got a squatter or whatever the case may be, is you'd say, hey, I'm willing to offer you X amount of dollars if you're out of here by the end of the week, the end of the month, whatever the case may be. And so a lot of times this is really helpful, especially for tenants where they may need to go, put first, last, and security down somewhere else. And they don't have that until you release theirs. And so this can kind of like free them up financially to actually be able to afford to leave where they're currently at. The other thing is that it's a carrot. No one really wants to be evicted. Evictions are, and sure, there's always the bad apple out there, but evictions are terrible for tenants. It is like good luck to ever trying to find a place again. Like you are moving back into mom's house. And so it is something that kind of gives them an escape. I have personally found that I find that most of the time when tenants are facing, hardship or it's a position where you need to evict, especially if it's for like a monetary reason, like non-payment of rent, as opposed to them being like a drug dealer or something like that, it really can work quite well. We've used it personally. And just, speaking generally about evictions and how to approach them. I mean, I don't know how you guys made out during the moratorium, but I mean, at the very start of it, we had a number of tenants be like, we can't pay rent. Whether it was because they were, waiters or waitresses where like, they literally no longer, they were an hourly worker. That job was gone for months and months and months in Philadelphia. Some of them were, international students. Some of them were grad students who were just like, I'm not making money anymore. Can I please move back in with mom and dad? And the approach that we have taken in our business that, thankfully helped us out a lot right now is that if a tenant says that they can't do something, believe them. Like saying like, well, the rent's still due is like, it's not going to change the fact. It's not. And so being really kind of proactive, having that good open relationship with your tenant. So they're telling you that stuff before rent is due, not like when you're like, hey, where's the rent at? And they're like, oh, actually I lost my job a month ago. And you're like, why am I finding out about this now? Because then you can say, hey, like, do we need to do a payment plan? Is this just like a short-term blip? Or should we talk about just ending your lease early? Because you'd be surprised. A lot of tenants just feel stuck. Like they're just like, man, I've got 6 months left on my lease. I might as well just throw my hands up in the air and say I'm stuck. And so laying it out for them and be like, hey, we've got a bunch of different options. If you think this is just, a short-term blip, you had you got sick, you didn't, get a lot of wages this week, but you're going to be back on track next week. Great. Let's, set up a payment plan, or maybe we'll even waive it, but let's document it down. Or we can say, do you want to just leave at the end of the month? Would that be best for you? A lot of tenants will say that's great. And sometimes they're like, yeah, but I need some extra money to do that. And sometimes that's where cash for keys can really come in and help you out. Because my thought is evictions are expensive, even if the legal fees are not necessarily that expensive. Most of the time it's, under $1,000 for an attorney to file and, process an eviction. The time it takes is very expensive. And then you're, dealing with the turnover and, perhaps a few months of non-payment. And so just probably something in that same ballpark of what the attorney's fee is, you could probably, have a win-win scenario for you, the landlord and the tenant.
Perfect. Got it. I have one more quick one because we want to get into one specific deal, but one last one. I heard that you can get sued by your realtor. Is that true? Have you ever had experience that? Can you walk us through
like really sued quick by anybody?
Yeah. First of all, you can get sued by anybody for anything. It's America. That's one of our founding principles. But sure. Yes. I have seen situations where, agents have sued clients. Largely, I will say it's around breach of the sales contract. And I will say if you're buying or selling in New Jersey, in attorney review, that's one of the things that attorneys will actually remove from the contract is the ability for agents to sue you for commissions in the event that the deal falls apart, even if it's your own breach. We make commissions due at the time of closing, not before then. So they can't turn around and sue you for it. Also in New Jersey, they can put a lien on the property, so you can't even sell it until you settle that debt with them. But the other piece of this, and I've seen this kind of bite people, especially sellers, in the butt, is on listings where say you're going to try to sell a property and, you give someone like a 60-day listing. If you don't read the fine print of that listing agreement where it says, they actually, have rights to any of those buyers for like a year or 18 months, then I've seen it because I have helped an agent do it. They found out about a sale to one of their listed buyers who came in during their listing period. about 30 days after what they thought was the official listing was done. They're like, the sign was gone, the listing is over. But since it was one of their official buyers, they're like, well, I brought this guy through just because it's, 30 days after my official listing was up, I still get credit for that. And so they'll sue you for the commission in that case as well. Really, really important to read your agreements with your agents when you're working with them. It's not one of those just like DocuSign this and move on. There's a lot of fill in the blanks in that. There's definitely some stuff that can be negotiable with that. And I don't want to call agents a dime a dozen, but there's more you can negotiate on than just like what their commission rate is going to be. They got fees in there you don't like, take it out. If they've got, I've seen buyers fees, they've got buyers, locked in to work with them exclusively for, 6 or 9 months, negotiate that stuff, because if they don't want to take it off, there's definitely an agent who will. And there's so many amazing agents, no matter where you are, who you can work with, that you don't have to just accept their terms. This isn't like a car loan. You can negotiate this stuff with them.
Yeah, very cool. Well, not cool to get sued, but,
cool.
But just cool to know the information. So we want to go a little bit back into your portfolio here, and we're putting you on the spot a little. Okay. But I want to know maybe you or your husband's most lucrative deal and just kind of some details on it, just to give people an idea of maybe this market, the student rentals. Doesn't have to be the most lucrative, but just maybe one that you have thought of that has worked out really well, that you could maybe talk, if you are willing to talk some numbers and just like maybe how you found it, what you ended up buying it for and you rented it for, and just some details there.
Like a success story.
Yeah. Okay, I have one. I don't know if this is our most lucrative deal, but it's definitely one of my favorite properties, and it's a cash flow king. And so I'll share about it. Did you guys have Lauren and Kyle from Rentals to Wealth on here? Okay. Yeah. So unbeknownst to me, this was something that the two of us were in a bidding war with each other on.
Oh, that's funny.
I guess it would have been about 5 years ago. And so I was, flush with our wedding money, and we're buying a duplex, baby. And this property was in Collingswood, New Jersey, and it was on MLS. It was something that popped up on MLS, and we're like, this seems like a pretty good deal. Collingswood's a nice spot. It was right near the Patco line, which is the commuter rail into Philadelphia. And it looks like a piece of crap, which is what we prefer. We definitely, like to put the value add into our properties, get something under market and fix it up ourselves. And so I think it was listed for $100,000. It was a duplex, small, one bedroom, up, down, no parking. But we got in a little bit of a bidding war, and I think we got it for like 109 or something like that. This is not the bidding wars of 2021 where it's like 50,000 over ask. This is the bidding wars of like 2015 where it was like, man, are we going to do 7,000 over ask?
It's like a bidding push. You didn't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Light tap.
So that was I think what we got it for. The place was like 1970 on the inside. It was like orange carpet and like orange metal cabinets. It was just bad. But it wasn't big. And so the renovation of it wasn't too expensive. I want to say we put maybe like 35 or so into it. New kitchens, new bathrooms, paint. We may have actually done LVP there. I think
you said 35K you put into it?
Yeah, I want to say about 35K or so. And the type of loan we had on it, because we purchased it with an LLC. We worked with a small bank. I want to say it was First Colonial out of Collingswood. And they had a pretty sweet kind of loan where it rolled in a construction loan into part of the loan. So we got a bunch of cash up front to actually do the reno. And it was
we just did it. It's called a home style.
Yeah.
Home style.
And so that's what we got. And we did the reno I would say we bought the property in like January, February, and we had it rent ready by like May 1st. And we rent both of those units for between $1,500 and $1,600 a month. And so.
Wow. So all in, can you give us the all in again? Is that one?
So all in, I would say was probably about 140-ish.
And you're renting for about $3,000?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's yeah.
do it.
So
You're crushing it. That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's probably
even if conservatively, right? Like, first of all, you're at the 3 times the 1%. Well, no, you're like 2.5 times the 1% rule.
Yeah.
So you're probably bringing in $1,500 a month or something crazy.
Oh, I mean, our mortgage on that, it's like something stupid. It's like $500, $600 a month.
The taxes.
I think the property taxes, because it's Jersey, is more than the mortgage on it.
I have 2 properties in Jersey that the property taxes are more than the mortgage. It's crazy. But that's awesome. So you rented it for roughly $3,100. You're saying, do you still have it today?
Oh yeah.
How much of those rents appreciated today?
We're probably about the same. I mean, we were pushing it with like 1,500 or so. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think they're up to like 1,600 maybe or so now. And oh my gosh, and they're just the easiest apartments to rent because they're 1 bedrooms. They're half a block off the Patco, but not on like the Patco side of it. So it's not as like loud and it doesn't like shake every time the train goes by. And so it's just perfect for, young professionals. We get, some grad students who are commuting into Rutgers, Camden, or doctors who are going to Cooper. And so we just get great tenants there. They don't always stay long. The one thing I would say, it seems to be like the apartment before people buy a house.
Right.
So they'll go there and then we'll get them for like maybe a year or 2. I mean, we've only had the property for 5 years, but we have had a good bit of turnover on it. And it's largely just because people are buying a house or, they finish up their grad program or law school or whatever the case may be.
That's interesting. We have at some of our properties, we have a tenant who's been there for 15 years. We haven't owned the property for 15. We've only owned it for 1, but she's been there for 15 years. She has no plans to go anywhere. And then we have, other tenants who are looking to purchase homes. And then we have our most recent tenant. They are in our property for well above what we thought we were going to get for. And we signed a 2-year lease. And it's one of those things where it's like, we're probably not going to raise rent for, a couple years at least, just because we know that we want them to stay and we know that they're paying a lot and not like astronomically over the amount, but like a lot that it satisfies what we thought we were going to get for it. So it's in that type of deal, I don't blame you for not raising it, especially if you have good tenants. So
it's one of those things where I'm like, could we maybe squeeze a $50 out of it? Maybe, but it's really easy to rent right now. And right down the block is this big like luxury apartment building where they're renting for like $2,000 a month. And so we kind of have to like be in between that because like they have parking, they are not in like an old building, but we're definitely on the luxury end of that market, but we can because, you're steps away from the main street and all the, the restaurants and the train that'll get you into Philly in like 8 minutes.
Cool. That's awesome. So we're winding down the show. I have one last question before we get into the core 4, which I know you're familiar with. But this question is specifically, I just know you have a lot going on between being a real estate attorney. You guys have 100 plus units. If you weren't organized, you'd be running around with a chicken with your head cut off. So can you talk about the specific programs or apps that you use to keep yourself organized on a daily basis and like what you use them for? I know specifically you use AppFolio and a few other things. So if you could dive in, that'd be great.
AppFolio is like the workhorse of what we use. It's what we use to send leases through. It's what we use to collect rent from every single one of our tenants. It's what we use to take maintenance requests and even text with our tenants. Like they all know that this is how they're supposed to officially communicate with us is through AppFolio. And they're great at it, which is nice because it is a great thing that if we ever needed to like prove something in court, it's like super print outable. There it is. And so AppFolio is our lifeblood. And it also allows us to do the marketing as well. Like it just will populate out to like apartments.com. And it used to do Zillow. I think now it since Zillow's changed everything, it doesn't anymore, but it hasn't been an issue. So it'll populate all of our marketing, which saves a lot of time. Like we just get the pictures done once, we write it out once, we turn it active or we turn it off. The other things that we, use very, very regularly are QuickBooks. That's where we do all of our bookkeeping. And because otherwise it would be a monstrosity come tax season every year. And we, try to keep things as, paperless as possible. We're looking into some, more automations and more ways to kind of free that up from us because some things, especially in Philly, it just, you get paper bills. You get paper bills for them. And so making that part of our monthly workflow a little bit easier is something that we're actively working on. When we, are doing a rehab, we'll use some project management softwares. Right now, my baby that I love is Monday.com. I know some people use like Asana or Trello or Podio or something like that. Monday.com, that's my jam. I use it in my law firm. I now use it for the real estate business and for my other business. And so it's color coded and friendly and sortable and can make graphs out of it. And that makes my very type A heart happy. And then, just one of the things I would say is that we're kind of very intentional about not making the same mistake twice. And so I kind of touched on it with the lawsuits that we had, but we're very kind of intentional of like, if something goes wrong with the tenant, like tenants are flushing tampons down the toilet or something like that. And you're like, God damn it, that was a really expensive plumbing bill. Like, how do I make sure this never lands on my lap again? What do I need to do around intake? What do I need to change in my lease? What do I need to do around, maintenance requests and expectations? So that way this never happens to us again. And so really kind of being intentional that as things go wrong, and we don't have to do it on the spot, but we can, bundle a few things together, maybe quarterly go through and say, hey, let's tackle all the things that we should be adding to our leases, or let's tackle all the stuff that, we should be thinking about before turnover season hits, has been, greatly helpful, because otherwise it can feel like you're, kind of building this house of cards where you're just kind of like making it up as you go. And it never really feels steady. And so when you have those things that go not necessarily even just wrong, where you're just like, yeah, that was like too difficult. It shouldn't have been that hard. How can we do that better? Being really intentional about going back. And then when you have the time, thinking about a system and a process to make it better.
I get that all the time, Bonnie, because actually today this happened on my property. My tenant was like, the toilet's not working. It's clogged. And I'm like, plunge it, like plunge the toilet. Like, and then she's like, well, I've tried and it didn't work. And then, so $175, plumber comes out. And then I'm like, I don't know if I have it in my lease that a clogged toilet is on the responsibility of the tenant. Like, I can say that I do, but until I really check, it may not be in there, in which case I would have, I can pay for it and then pass it through to my tenant, and I'll have to figure out if I can actually do that or not. But again, at the end of the day, $175 is not a lot, but I've had so much maintenance at this property that it's just something that I'm thinking about. Like,
exactly.
What is the responsibility of the tenant? And it's funny, this property, I've had 10 times the amount of maintenance that the properties that Ryan and I have together. It's like unbelievable, but I'm just like,
There's a common theme there, buddy.
What's that? I need a property manager.
You're missing me, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's the magic.
He definitely is. So, but that's, I appreciate you bringing that up, and it's good for people to check on their leases and then add things in, systematize them, like you said. So, thanks for
yeah. I mean, this turnover season, we just had some funky stuff happen to us this week where we're like, nope, that's not happening again next year. Where one of the things we've intentionally done is we end our leases 4 days earlier than the end of the month. So most of our leases, instead of ending like August 31st, they'll end like August 27th. That way we'll have time to get our crews in there, paint, clean, do all that nonsense before the next tenants come in. And it's really never been an issue. This year, like on the day of the 27th, we've had tenants be like, nope, not moving out. We're like, shit. Well, let's, figure out, putting penalties in there around that, and maybe doing reminders 30 days out about, what the expectation is around move out, and leaving and this isn't the first time this happened, but, leaving your couch and your broken bed frame in the unit is like not an acceptable thing for us to do. And like, yeah, we've got their security deposit and we can deal with that. But in the moment when we're, turning over dozens and dozens of units over a period of 4 days, it's a pain in the butt that we don't want to deal with. It's not so much about the money as it is the hassle.
Interesting. Yeah. It's some things like that. It's like you'd think that people just know what they have to do when they move out. But I know that, and as I think about it, they definitely don't. And
they don't. And so some of that's just like, we didn't make that clear enough. We'll do better.
Cool.
Absolutely.
So as we wind down the show, we have the second to last segment is called the Core Four. We have the same questions that we're going to ask, that we ask all of our guests. We're going to fire them at you and kind of get to know you a little bit more. So first, what is your favorite real estate investing or business book?
Okay, I'll go with business book. And I don't know if this is my favorite, but it's one I just read and it's really sticking with me a lot. It is called A Company of One. That's what it's called. It's called A Company of One. I wanted to say like the one CEO. I'm like, that's not it. A Company of One. And it's about how staying small is the next big thing as a kind of anti-scaling where, maybe you don't want to have, 5,000 doors and 60 employees. Like, how can you kind of create a really lean business, have balance, have control, and just kind of keep things, keep yourself within a niche. You don't have to do everything. If, this is what your income goal is, then do that. It doesn't have to always be the sky's the limit.
That book actually sounds like it would really interest me. Like Ryan and I have talked about this all the time. Like, we do not have to have an empire of 1,000 units. Coincidentally enough, we interviewed Tim Bratz 2 weeks ago, and he's got 4,500 units. And I was thinking, like, man, I know he's worth tens of millions of dollars, and maybe that would be awesome, but I don't know. Like, I don't know where our true goal is. So originally we had 60 units as a goal. I think it's shifted to more of a cash flow number. So I like that. I think that's something that I would potentially want to read there. So
yeah.
Cool.
Question 2 on the core 4 is, if you had an extra $50,000 worth of discretionary income, how would you deploy it or invest it, and why?
Forex. Just kidding.
I know somebody who kills it in Forex, but
seriously?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Maybe I would buy a Bitcoin. That's like one of those things that like I haven't bought yet. I have some Ethereum and I have some Dogecoin because I think it's kind of funny. And I see it like going to the casino. I'm like, if this thing becomes worth like a penny, I'm loaded.
Yeah, exactly.
But seriously though, I think I probably would buy a Bitcoin, and that right now doesn't leave me a whole lot. If it dropped back down to like 27,000 or so, it might leave me a little bit more.
Yeah.
Other than that, doesn't leave me a whole lot. Probably put it into and this is so boring, a 529 for my kids, a well-invested 529 education plan. That ish is not getting any cheaper. They are literally still in diapers, but you have to start now or else it's going to be extremely unaffordable down the line. And so totally. I'd probably do a mix of, I'll say traditional stock market type investing in the 529.
That's so interesting. Maybe it's because you're at 100 units and you're like, okay, we're good. Like we built the powerhouse. But I'm a lot of people, a lot of investors jump and say, I know you're at a different stage, right? But they would be like, oh, I'd buy a duplex for a house hack, or I'd buy X, Y, Z, or put a down payment on another property. How come? Just curious, how come no real estate?
Just because 50,000 probably isn't enough for what we typically buy.
Yeah.
And so,
big leagues. Fair enough. Totally fair.
And I'm like, that's not really going to get us a down payment on, 6 units in Philadelphia. So what would I just do with it? And that would like complete a purchase. And that's why I'm thinking like Bitcoin. I do think, because we focus so long on just real estate. And we're always looking for real estate. Don't get me wrong. But I also think it's important to diversify. I don't think it's smart to have all your eggs in one basket. And so, I think even crypto, is something that's worth having, even if it's just a mutual fund that you own that invests in crypto is a good way to diversify yourself.
Love it.
Awesome. So we've heard a lot of the good things that you've done over your career, and there's been a lot of them, but I want to know what your biggest mistake has been in your real estate investing. Maybe your journey as a lawyer too, but and how have you learned from it more importantly?
Oh, good question. My biggest mistake is, I would say, and I don't know if this is a mistake because I don't regret anything, is I wish I would have considered real estate as something that could have been for me earlier. I think I kind of saw it as like, I'm a woman, there's construction involved, it's complicated. Yes, I like, looking at the pretty pictures on Pinterest or whatever, but like there really did seem to be this like mental block for me where I was like, real estate is for like the big boys, and, looking at pretty pictures of houses is like what is for me. And that was kind of like my only foray into it for a while. And I kind of realized that I'm like, I don't need to know how to like work us all to be in real estate, even though I probably would like to, know my way around some power tools. But I generally didn't think, and I see this a lot with especially young women. I mean, if you just look at the industry, there's a lot of young single guys who are doing this stuff, and there's not a lot of young single girls. It's growing, but I would love to see more, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24-year-old women knowing that real estate investing is for them. And when they, are going to college or their first job out of high school, considering house hacking or apartment hacking or things like that this isn't something that, numbers aren't scary and all of that stuff that I feel like sometimes gets ingrained into women that we learn to shed as we get older. But I definitely see that as something that I think held me back in some ways.
I think that's really, really important to bring up. And if you look back at some of our episode guests, we got some women on here who are incredible investors who have just absolutely debunked that stigma that you said. And a number of them are in their 20s. So I think it's
it's definitely changing. And I've met quite a few of them, and I'm so glad that it was. But even just like my dipping my toe into it as a lawyer, I was just like, "Ooh, like, can I handle this?"
Right.
And then I get into it, and I'm like, I can handle it. I can do it better than the rest of y'all. So I just wish I would have had that, that attitude 15 years ago.
Got it. Makes sense.
Love that. Really appreciate that answer. Last one of the core four is, what do you want your legacy to be? So why are you doing all this? What gets you out of bed every morning?
So I wanted to have the flexibility, and I feel like this is what, a lot of investors say, is that the lifestyle choice. What I love about our rental income is that it in many ways it is our income, but it also smooths out the bumps in finances to be able to take other risks. Like for me to go out and start my law firm or my other business, or be able to say, you know what, in August, I got tired. The real estate market was really, really long and brutal market to kind of go through for the last 18 months or so. And I was like, I'm turning my phones off for 3 weeks. And I knew that we still had money coming in no matter what. And so that felt really good. And being able to, kind of have a job, don't get me wrong, self-managing 100 units is a job, but a job that, allows me to drop my kids off when they want to, and go down the shore when I want to, and, kind of work from wherever. And that is something that has taken, a process. When you self-manage, being able to step away, you have to have that trusted team in place to be able to, open a door for someone if you need to. But just that flexibility and the ability to make choices has been, absolutely life-changing. And obviously, to have a better life for my kids. I think every generation of my family has really kind of drove for that to happen from, when my great grandparents moved to this country. We've always kind of set out, and our intention is to make life easier and better for our kids. And so when I think about that, that doesn't mean, dropping millions of dollars of real estate in their lap and be like, you're rich, so everything is better. But it's also showing them, work ethic, and showing them the power and flexibility of just entrepreneurship generally, because that's really how I look at real estate investing, as it's entrepreneurship that involves owning houses.
100%. I couldn't agree more. I think it's I feel like I learn something new every day. And one of the things that I have learned is that even though our portfolio is small and we are self-managing right now, just because we're the ones taking the calls doesn't mean we're the ones doing the work. So if we can systematize that out, we may be the first call, but we're not taking time to be at the property actually doing the fixes, as long as we have, people that we trust doing it. So I imagine it's even more so like that at scale, since you're not the one swinging the hammer with a 100-unit portfolio. So exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's never going to be completely passive income unless you're like investing in a REIT or a syndication or something like that. But it's definitely a lot less work than when I was working a 9 to 5.
Absolutely. Cool. So we've made it to the last drop. And here we want to know if you could go back, Bonnie, and speak to, teenage self. What advice would you give yourself, and why?
I'd probably say trust your parents when they tell you to go to schools that give you scholarships so you don't have to take student loans. I did follow
Very
that advice,
specific.
but I did it begrudgingly. Parents typically do know best when it comes to like financial decisions for, a teenager to make. I'd also say to not listen to your parents as much also. In certain things, like there was just a lot of things that like I wish I would have done in my, early 20s, like more travel, more flexibility, kind of fearlessly, dabbling in things. Like I've always kind of been like a person who was like, this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to go achieve it, rather than saying like, what do I actually want to do first? And so I went to school for business, and then I graduated undergrad in 3 years because I knew I wanted to go to law school. And then I dove right into law school. And then I kind of just was like on this wheel of like achieving without ever realizing like where I was actually going. And so trying to taking some time to actually figure that out. My husband is Israeli. And before they go to university in Israel, they all have the mandatory army service. And yep. I've kind of seen in that culture that a lot of these kids kind of just have a better head on their shoulders of where they want to go, what they want to do, because they don't go straight from like school to like achievement and professionalism. They've got this like gap to like, yes, serve their country, but also be like kind of grow up, mature, and like figure out who they are as a person out in the real world.
Got it. I think I've been to Israel. I was there on birthright, and it's eye-opening, and I met all the soldiers that, it's just like, it's something that they are trained to do that is, I think, a humbling experience. And you're right. It makes them grow up pretty quick but also have that time to like not be rushed into the corporate, so to speak, world. So that's cool. Well, Bonnie, it's been awesome. Thank you for coming on, dropping some knowledge on our listeners, talking about, being a lawyer, and we have not had a real estate attorney on. So it's been great. If people want to learn more about you, maybe they're looking for a lawyer, who knows, maybe, or they want to just like learn more about your content. Cause I know you share a lot on social. What's the best way they can get in touch with you?
Sure. I'd say probably the top two places to find me are on my Instagram. That's where I like to hang out a lot. I'm a millennial. Call me out for what it is. It's Bonnie Galam ESQ. That's my Instagram. Or I have a podcast as well, at the Good Bones Real Estate Investing Podcast, where I talk a lot about asset protection and the business of real estate investing. So yeah, those are, I'd say, the top two places to come hang out with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. And this is an episode that we're going to always be able to direct people to when they're looking for real estate advice as it relates to, the attorney side of things. So
awesome, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yep.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.